We are talking about this breaking news item where Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice have called for it to be a federal crime for that Charlotte light rail stabbing. A lot of the footage has been going around the last 24 hours or so. We've seen the horrifically violent murder of a Ukrainian refugee, a young woman who simply was riding the train, had no interaction. And of course, this opens up a big story of what the crime situation looks like in America right now. As you saw, the person who has been arrested, who President Trump has even called potentially for the death penalty for the alleged murder and again, I think this is where it's a little different. I'm typically not someone who ever promotes the death penalty. Actually, I'm not sure if I agree with it at this point, but this is a pretty clear-cut case where this person was murdered. Now, there has been calls for psychiatric evaluations and this kind of thing with this murderer who, as we know, had a very long record and was walking free. There has been also a lot to be said about people who are on the bus or on the train with them saying, they didn't do anything, they didn't stand up. I don't want to put any sort of blame on anyone who is around them. I think that you don't know what you would do in that situation. You don't even know if they even understood what happened. If you're wearing headphones, it didn't seem like it was a very chaotic situation in many ways. So I don't want to be putting a lot of blame on those people. But what I do want to put blame on is the system that is somehow letting people who are this violent, who have been convicted of so many different crimes, walk freely amongst people. And look, I've had it happen even to myself, where there are situations where you interact with people later on, you find out how bad it has been. And even the police know it. The police forces a lot of times know about these guys. They know that this is happening, but they are hamstrung to do anything.
That's right. And as of right now, he has been charged with first-degree murder under state law. But also, Pam Bondi announced that she has directed my attorneys to federally prosecute DeCarlos Brown Jr., a repeat violent offender with a history of violent crime, for murder. They're going to prosecute him for murder. That sentence sounded a little odd, but it's the way it's written. We will seek the maximum penalty that is for this unforgivable act of violence. He will never again see the light of day as a free man. And I think that this conversation, there's a lot of angles to it that a lot of people online are hitting, but I think honestly, it does come back to the crime issue that we have seen in this country. And you see every opportunity that the left can make this political, saying, oh, you're only going after D.C., you're only going after Chicago, when in reality, and this is what we said last week on this broadcast, is that there are problems in New Orleans. There are problems in Memphis, which is in Tennessee. There are problems in St. Louis, in the red state of Missouri, that the city centers, the urban centers of our country have become a place where things like this happen. Not super randomly anymore. You hear of just senseless violence, no interaction, no altercation between the perpetrator and the victim.
And no motive.
And in this, you end up with a 23-year-old refugee who was fleeing Putin's reign of terror to get stabbed to death on a light rail system in Charlotte, North Carolina. That doesn't sound like what the United States should be, the beacon of freedom in this world.
Of course, this is not an isolated incident. This is one that we're seeing maybe a little more clear because of the footage, because it exists. We can see what happens. We can see the person walked free. They had an existing record that was extensive. You're also saying there was a Ukrainian refugee who was murdered in where? The state of North Carolina, not Chicago, not in Memphis or Detroit. This was happening in North Carolina, which again, it's not like this is a rural area. I think we need, people who maybe don't live in the area don't know. These are big cities.
One of the biggest banking cities outside of New York on the East Coast.
You may not picture that when you think of North Carolina. You may be thinking of the mountains or something like that. Of course, it's a beautiful area. But we're talking about major cities that are involved here. But you see this footage and you can't help but be shocked and horrified. And then also you have sort of the two sides here where President Trump, it took a long time for the news media to start covering it. So that was a whole story. Then once they started covering it, it had to be very careful and not skewed. And then you had another situation where President Trump and now the Department of Justice have stepped in and said, we believe this should be federally prosecuted.
And what is frustrating about this story in general, one, is that the tragedy and the senseless loss of life, I think, is getting overlooked by people on both the right and the left. This seems to be a kind of bellwether moment for people in the conservative sphere saying, look, this is what we're talking about with the crime. Then obviously those on the left are trying to make it a racial thing, that the only reason they care is because of race issues with that. The problem is that this should be a moment that is in some ways unifying for our country. This is in North Carolina. It's not in Chicago. This is in there's a Ukrainian refugee who came here to flee Putin, something that the right has not cared as much about as the left when it comes to the politics of it. And this shouldn't be political. In reality, the United States cities should be free. They should be safe. They should be an example for the world. And we've gotten to a place where that is not the case. And I don't care if it's New York City and Los Angeles or if it's Charlotte and Memphis. These cities have become dangerous places, and not dangerous because of gangs that are fighting each other and you may get caught in the crossfire. It is when there is an individual that had no interaction with another individual, got on the train, sat down after work, still in a work uniform from a pizza place, sitting down, minding your own business, and the person behind this individual decides to pull out a knife 4 minutes into the train ride and attack and then walk away. And so there's a lot of blame games going on with the people around. Ridiculous, because even in the footage, which is horrific, at first it appears that maybe she was just hit or just shoved. There was not even a scream or anything. But it should get much broader even than just the petty fighting over the story about the media's not talking about it enough or this isn't it. It should get back to, we are the United States of America. Our cities should be safe. Our people should be able to go home from work freely and not be concerned about getting stabbed in the neck on the ride home, not after an altercation, not after a fight, but just for existing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we've kind of let the public transit situation become like you're taking your life into your own hands. Like that's become honestly like think about New York and the subway system. It's become less about safety and more about you are taking a risk by using public transportation.
Right.
Which is absurd on the nature of itself. So much so they have clearly security cameras built into these. But that still does not stop the crimes, still does not stop people from being able to perpetrate this and get away with it for some time. Now, obviously, the person has been arrested. You have President Trump calling for the death penalty. You have a lot of extremes happening, but this is one case and one in many. And I want to go ahead and take a phone call. Jeff's calling from North Carolina. Of course, I'm sure, Jeff, this is dominating your news cycle there locally, but I just get your thoughts in general.
Well, you raised a point about bystanders not stepping in or just not doing anything. And I think that because of where we are right now, as a white male in a situation like that, the first thing you think of is, instead of reacting to help, you think of how this is going to destroy my family. This could be destroying me.
Well, and Jeff, what was extremely publicized was Daniel Penny in the New York subway, a Marine who stepped up to help people on a subway car, had to go through a public trial because of that. Because the individual that had mental health problems, that was acting erratic and threatening, and restrained him, died under restraint. And Daniel Penny was charged with murder for that. And America knows that. We saw it on television. So to Jeff's point as well, the people that are saying, look, no one stood up to help her, America's collective conscience knows that happened recently, that even if you make a wrong move or try to help, that being a good Samaritan could cost you financially, your freedom if you are convicted because something happens when trying to help another person. So the America helping each other sense of it has also been damaged in recent years because of good Samaritans that have stood up to help. When we have a problem where the police resources aren't enough to keep people safe, the court system, this individual had been arrested 14 times, from larceny to armed robbery to assault since 2011. So this is not someone unfamiliar to law enforcement. They were currently had a pending psychiatric evaluation from the court. This person had been released on cashless bail numerous times. which cashless bail isn't you have to pay with a credit card. Cashless bail means you're released without having to pay anything. And these are some of the issues that we're seeing. And then the left, because it is the right that is saying, okay, this is a crime issue, has started to push back and try to, it comes across as making excuses for what is an unexplainable act of violence instead of saying, you know what, we do need to figure this out. But their answers, even on CNN, is like, well, if someone has schizophrenia and is a criminal, you can't just put them in prison. It's like, well, if they are guilty of crimes and a repeat offender, then they aren't being rehabilitated by the criminal justice system.
If we're going to have those kind of caveats, then there also has to be caveats to treatment.
Right.
It can't be, well, then you just are allowed to be free and do whatever you want to do because you were able to be designated in some form of mental illness. I understand there are people who suffer extremely from mental illness. I'm not saying they all need to be locked up or put in jail, but you know what? They certainly don't. But there are issues where these kind of things happen, where you're a violent crime perpetrator who's done them numerous of times, regardless of your situation. We have to have plans now in place. If you're going to put the plan in place, say you can't do this because someone has a mental health issue, well, then there has to be a way for them to be still held accountable, or at least someone around them to be held accountable for it.
Well, and I want to see a courageous Democrat right now. I really do. I want to see a courageous Democrat that will break with the party narrative that anything President Trump is doing is evil and should be rejected whole cloth. Because this is something that if we cannot solve as the American people, then what can we do? What can we do if we can't come together and say, let's take all the political trappings away from this about the location and the state and the refugee?
I mean, that's the answer.
But that can't be the answer.
Can't be the answer,
if
but
we
that
are the
will
United
be
States
the
of
answer.
America. That's why I want to see a courageous Democrat stand up and say, you know what? Let's work together and figure out and forget all of our talking points and all of our agenda. It won't happen, but that's what I would love to see, because that is the true spirit of the American people, of coming together to try to solve something that should not be happening.